You know, the fascinating thing about Trump, for example, is I always say to people, I've known him a long time and know him very well. He's got the thinnest skin of any person in public life. He reacts to absolutely everything and goes to DEFCON 1 in a heartbeat. But he also has the thickest skin. He can soak up stuff that would crush any other political figure in history in seconds. This is a guy facing nearly 100 criminal charges, and yet all that's done is actually make him more popular. I mean, we are into completely uncharted territory with Trump as a political figure, aren't we?
Well, I don't think the Democrats could have done a better job of keeping the name of Trump alive if they would have planned to do that. And it's certainly possible that in some ways they did plan to do that, because the scuttlebutt among the political theorists that pass for wise men among the Democrats is that, well, if Trump is the candidate, then Biden can beat him. It's like, well, not necessarily. I wouldn't bet the farm on that, although that's probably already occurred. And you know, Trump is canny enough to know that in some real way, all publicity is good publicity. And it's certainly the case that the Democrat persecution of Trump, and I think that's the right term, has kept him alive and has also cast him so perversely in the role of victim that the Democrats themselves are always, what would you say, trumpeting as being allied with. It's an unbelievably demented move on the strategic side. You know, my sense was if Biden would have taken a careful look at the Abraham Accords, which he certainly should have, because then we wouldn't be in the situation we're in right now in relationship to Israel, let's say. He could have given Trump a medal, clapped him on the back, said, "Good job, mate," and maybe he would have ridden off into the sunset. Now, that would have meant the Democrats would have had to contend with someone like DeSantis, let's say, who's at minimum hyper-competent. And I don't think that was in the cards. So instead, they determined to play idiot political games, not like those aren't well known on the Republican side. And they raised Trump from the dead. And they do that continually. So, well, I think personally, and this is just a guess because what do I know, I think that the most likely outcome is that Trump is the next president. That's what it looks like to me. So I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think that could
he's
absolutely
he's so
happen.
divisive. That's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it was interesting because when I did the Celebrity Apprentice, the first series of that back in 2008, I saw Trump across a boardroom table for 3 hours a night for about 6 weeks. And you get to know somebody pretty well, actually, because a lot of it didn't get aired. If he showed even an ounce of the empathy that he showed to people then, if he showed more of the humor without being vicious, if he showed less of the punching everyone in the face and more of occasionally putting a metaphorical arm around people, I think the perception of Trump would change dramatically. But he seems to think the only way to be a political leader is to be a kind of swaggering, trash-talking, very aggressive person. And I think that's a shame. It's a shame for him, and it's a shame for those like me who see a lot of good in Trump. He's been, you know, he was very good to me. When I left America, left CNN and went back to Britain, I can count on one hand the number of American people in the business, if you like, who stayed in touch with me. Trump did. He rang me quite regularly to check how I was doing. Could he help? You know, he didn't need to do that. So he has got these qualities. It's just I don't see much evidence of it, of him as a political leader. He's taken a different path.
Well, I would say part of that is a consequence of the fact that the radical leftists have given it compassion and empathy a bad name. You know, and so because Trump is standing against, especially the radicals, he's been put in a position where he more or less de facto has to stand against that kind of smothering, quasi-maternal, devouring sympathy that's part and parcel of being allied with the victims. And so part of that's an ideological problem. I would also say that I believe that there has been no political figure, certainly in my living memory, with the possible exception of Richard Nixon, who's been vilified more thoroughly and also more falsely than Trump. And I would point to the idiot conclusion of Russian collusion, especially with regards to the Hunter Biden laptop, as evidence in that regard. You know, I mean, Trump has no shortage of flaws, let's say, a statement that can be said of all of us. But apart from vicious criticism with regard to those faults, there has been an absolute surfeit of devastating criticism and persecution for faults that are not real. And, you know, it isn't obvious to me how much a person can take without starting to feel continually embattled. You know, I've certainly had to fight against the proclivity to cease turning the other cheek, let's say, with regards to those who regard themselves as my enemies. Because if you're gone after enough, you tend to think that the best defense is a good offense, let's say. And it's very difficult to plot your way forward against those kinds of odds. Now, Trump did go into the White House as an outsider, both on the Republican and the Democrat front, and he has faced no shortage of impediments. And it's a hell of a lot to ask of someone to take all that with good graces. And he's certainly done better than he might have in that regard. I mean, he's still in the race, for example. Now, you might say, well, if you want to be president, you better be the guy that has that kind of largeness of spirit. And fair enough. But you know, let him who is without sin cast the first stone, let's say.
Right.
He's an old guy, you know, and he's bombastic. And he's under a lot of pressure. And so, and all the lies that have been generated to blacken his name have made him a worse man, at least in his public-facing image, than he might otherwise have been. And I can't help but see in that also a kind of nefarious, underhanded plan. If you can't defeat your opponent fair and square on the field of vision, let's say, or compassion, then you can do everything you can to back them into a corner and provoke them into doing something reprehensible so that you can blacken their name. And it's certainly the case that the Democrats have done absolutely everything they possibly could to do that, say, with regard to January 6th, while simultaneously taking no responsibility whatsoever for the widespread rioting that accompanied, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement.